Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Butowski, Director of Programming. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. The arts nonprofit Center for Native Futures, which focuses on redefining Indigenous Futurism, will open an art center for Native artists and writers to develop their artistic practices in downtown Chicago this fall. This panel is presented in partnership with Center for Native Futures, the Terra Foundation for American Art as part of Art Design Chicago Now, the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago, and S. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful panelists.
Ha mitakepi, Kate Beane makiapie, hedipi windemeye, wakpai pakshan edmo omawapi, Daya Yahipi. Welcome here today. My name is Kate Beane. In Dakota, I'm known as Brings Them Home Woman. And I'm a citizen of the Wakpai Pakshan, or the Bend in the River people, also known as the Flandreau Santee Sioux Dakota, who today are in Flandreau, South Dakota, though we come from Minnesota. And I'm also Muskogee Creek. And I'm happy to see you all here today. I serve as the executive director of the Minnesota Museum of American Art in downtown Iminijeska, also known as St. Paul, Minnesota. And from what I've been told, I'm one of the first and only executive directors of an American art museum, which, as wonderful as it sounds, thank you. When I was first told that, I think my first response was, well, that's terrible. What took so long? And thinking about my background's in public history, and I am very closely connected to the history of the lands where I live as a person who was displaced out of Minnesota. Our people were removed after the Dakota War of 1862. And I've worked really hard to help elevate the voices and stories and experiences of my community in our homeland territory. To bring us back. And as Indigenous women, there's a lot of power. There's a lot of power here on this stage today. There is a lot of bringing back. And that's part of who I am as Brings Them Back Woman, Brings Them Home Woman, is, that there's that focus of returning home, of bringing home, of helping people to understand who we are, as women and as community, and to help be those connectors to bring people together. And I think we have a tall order working within museums and institutions to do that work within these colonial systems that were not created for us or by us, but we're here today. And we're doing some phenomenal work, and the women on this stage are doing some really, really wonderful work where we are contemporary and modern women living through a historic time. And I'd like to ask everyone to sort of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Start with me. Oh, wow, this is weird. I could hear myself on the speakers here. Hello, everyone. I'm Debra Yepa-Pappan. I'm Jemez Pueblo and Korean. I'm a mother, daughter, wife, visual artist, Chicagoan. I grew up here in Chicago, so this is my hometown. But I have very close connections to my home community in Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico. I'm a co-founder of the Center for Native Futures, which is a newly formed Native Art Center here in Chicago that is the only Native artist-founded and led organization here in Chicago for Native artists. I'm also, my day job is I'm a Native Community Engagement Coordinator at the Field Museum, where my work was very critical in helping to redevelop the Native American Hall, which is now Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. And first, I want to say thank you to Kate here at Expo for, providing this platform for us to be up here to share our work. Thank you, Kate, for opening up with your very warm welcome. And just thank you to these badass women here, too. You're badass also. These are women whose, as Native women that I admire also, and I love the work that they're doing. And so I'm glad to be here on the stage with them. One of our artists, Holly Wilson, is over here. Tom Jones back there. So I'm loving the Native presence in here too. Audra, I'm calling you out as well. I think that's just something that's very important, right? And something a part of our practice is. And Nora Lloyd, Kelly Covey. Sorry, I'm going to call all the Natives out when I see you. But that's part of our practice too, right? Is acknowledging each other and welcoming each other, and that's kind of the work that I was doing at the Field Museum. Field Museum is one of the most colonial institutions in the country, in the world, here in this city. And it was not always a very welcoming space for Native people because it's an intimidating structure. It's a place that holds our ancestors and a lot of our material culture that was just stolen from us. And so it was never really a place that was very welcoming. And Lois back there too. So I think, thankfully we had a curator there, Alaka Wally, who's here as well, who kind of, helped unlock that door so that, a handful of us, myself, could come in and just kind of knock that door open and keep that door open to bring Native people in and to create that Native presence there. So when I think about indigenizing colonial institutions, that's one of the first ways, right? To create an environment where Native people feel like they can come to, where they feel like they can be welcomed into. And it really makes a difference, too, that it's a Native person that's doing that work, that is doing that welcoming and helping make those connections. I'm very proud of the work that happened there at the Field Museum. It really led to me also being able to have conversations with other colonial institutions around the country and help to try to, just guide others on better practices and how they could, do community outreach or engagement with Native people. And again, I'm really proud of that work. But colonial institutions want to stay colonial institutions. You could try to move it. You could try to. It's a mountain, right? It's hard to budge. You could budge it a little bit, but then they're more comfortable back here, and so then they kind of take those steps backwards. And as an artist. Here in Chicago, there were very few opportunities for Native artists to find representation here in the city of Chicago, which has one of the largest urban Native populations in the country. And there's not one gallery that supports or now there are galleries, right? But they always bring in like maybe the top 1-2 Native artists from outside of Chicago into their gallery spaces and never from within or within proximity. We have 2 major art institutions, the Art Institute, another colonial institution, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, which also they don't invite us into their spaces. They're not inviting spaces either. So it gets kind of tiring, and what you do is you push yourself to, say, hey, we're more than capable. We can do this on our own. We don't need you. We're going to create our own space, and we're going to create Center for Native Futures. And we're going to do it our way, from scratch, for our people, by us. And so that's why Center for Native Futures exists now. And luckily, we had a lot of support in that. There's so much more to say. There's a lot. I'm a very critical person, too, about white spaces and spaces that are not comfortable for Native people to walk into, but we'll probably get into that a little more. So, thanks.
Those critiques are incredibly important, and I just want to say, as women, as Indigenous people, we bring our people with us, right? And I think the work of all of you speaks to that. Anya, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you're doing?
Hold on, let me find the slides. So this is Debra's. Hey. I know, I think we need a clap for that. And then actually, since your slides are next, do you want to? Oh, okay.
Just close your eyes, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Skugdash, Apia Chugig, Anya Montiel. Good day, everyone. My name is Anya Montiel, and I am Tohono O'odham and Mexican. So the O'odham are from the area of what is now known as Phoenix, Arizona, and keep on going south into Sonora, Mexico. I am a curator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. So some people may not know we have two locations. So one in Washington, D.C., which is very much a building that we built with Native input. And then we occupy an existing building in New York City. I am the curator of this exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian. It's called Ancestors Know Who We Are, featuring the work of 6 Black Indigenous women artists. So these are the women who are part of the show. And the image here is by Monica Rickert-Bolter, who is an artist who is also part of Center for Native Futures, and she's actually in their booth right now. And so this exhibition that I curated, I was always hearing that people wanted to hear from artists about, just talk about the Black experience, just talk about the Native experience, not understanding that if you are mixed, you can't just be Black on Tuesday and Native on Wednesday. So I would have these conversations with a lot of the artists I know, and they would get just so frustrated that a lot of curators would just say to them, we only want you to talk about being Black, or we only want you to talk about being Native. And so I was saying, if we are the National Museum of the American Indian, then we need to talk about contemporary lived experiences of Indigenous people. So that is why I decided to do this exhibition. And this is actually all online. So if you go to the museum's website, you can see all the artworks. This is just a snippet of some of the artworks that are in the show. And also, as part of the exhibition, I interviewed all the artists, and there are YouTube videos where you can learn more about them. And I thought that was really important because, especially, I wanted everyone to understand that these artists are very different. There's not one way to be Native, there's not one way to be Black. And so I wanted you to really understand the passions of these artists and what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, talk about their backgrounds. I showed this image because Joelle Joyner is from Detroit, and she is the youngest artist. She was 21 years old when the show opened, and she said to me, I don't like being on camera. I get really nervous. And everybody else had, video interviews. And so I talked to our media team, and he said, well, since Joelle does digital art, we have the same software that Stephen Colbert uses where you can create these little avatars. And he said, why doesn't she create her own avatar? And when I asked Joelle, she loved that. It was just wonderful for her to create her own avatar. And then we put it into the software with her audio recording. So to me, this is really making sure that you listen to the artists and listening what they were comfortable with. I would have felt horrible if she would have just said oh, well, everyone else is doing these video interviews, and so I guess I better do it. But instead, I love that she said, I don't want to do this. And so we found another way to feature her words. Also, since I am not Afro-Indigenous, I brought in community members. So these are 4 scholars that I brought in. Some are art historians, some are historians, some work in education. And so I brought them in to write essays essays about the themes in the show, and they also wrote extended label captions. So you can hear from them about their feelings about some of the works in the show. And another thing, everybody was paid. So I paid the artists for the works that's in the show, and then I also paid all of the writers. And then, yes, that's very important too. And also, so the National Museum of the American Indian, we do have a large collection, but we also have photo archives and paper archives. And so we were looking through the archives, and so I was finding these photos, like the one on the left, of Zervia Gould Mitchell, who's Black and Wampanoag. And so we have these historical photos of the evidence of Afro-Indigenous people. But then also, we didn't have as many contemporary photos. So then I also contacted community members. So this is a photo that was added into the show of Maya Bernadette, and she's Thanatham and Black and Mexican and white with her now husband. So I really wanted people to understand that, you know, we as a museum, we can't just show the old stuff, right? We need to also kind of like talk about, you know, contemporary people today. And then also, it was really important for me to have accessibility. So to make sure that as much as possible, this exhibition is accessible. And one of the difficulties about when you do have just letting YouTube or something generate the closed captions is that when there's not a non-English language that is spoken, it comes up as foreign language. And so if you're having someone speak in an indigenous language and it's coming up as foreign language, that is disgusting. And as the National Museum of the American Indian, that is not okay. So I went through and corrected all the closed captions. And so for another artist, Paige Pettibon, I went directly to her and I said, please help me out, you know, for this. So this is, you know, when she's speaking in the Salish language, that you can make sure that you can see it. Also, what's really important are alt tags. So if you are someone who is blind or has low vision, if you are listening to a video, you can't see if maybe the video cuts to an artwork or cuts back to the person in the studio. So then we made sure that we created 2 versions in YouTube of one with alt tags. So this little blue box, when it comes to that part, then it will say, you know, Moira sits in her studio. You can see the photographs and, you know, cameras behind her. So that is something as well that we made sure that we put in the exhibition. And what I thought was really interesting about the alt tags is that when we did them, they would generate light-skinned woman, dark-skinned woman. And I was thinking, so then people don't know that they are all Afro-Indigenous. They're just reading them as this is a light-skinned person, this is a dark-skinned person, and making really who they are kind of invisible. And so we changed those. So I changed them all. Also, it's very interesting that they say young, old, right? So, so I went in, and I will say, I just did say like woman in her 30s. You know, woman in her 40s, right? Like I didn't want someone to be considered old because what is really old? You know, it's so subjective. Or what is really young?
They say young elder.
I know. No young elder. But yeah, but these are the things that I think are really important. It's like accessibility is very important, but you also have to understand when these are being done that sometimes you have to do the extra work to make sure that Afro-Indigenous people are showing up. And also languages are probably, you know, are using the proper spelling. So those are my slides. And again, yes, I'm a curator at the National Museum of the American Indian, and it's so wonderful to be here with all of you.
I love the points that you give. I see people writing furiously in their notebooks, which is always, you know, really helpful, I think, to give really tangible things for people to really think about, okay, what can I do? What is the actionable thing here? Like, how can we actually be a part of this change? And, you know, thinking about listening, about paying artists a wage, about accessibility and not looking at our languages as foreign. All of those things are so incredibly important. So, Pida Maya. Heather, what can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you do?
Thanks, Kate. Unasakut tungatsagiti, Dr. Heather Igloliorte. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Heather Igloliorte. I'm an Inuk from Nunatsiavut, which is the most easterly part of the Atlantic coast of this continent. But I currently live in Zhegagoynak, which is Haudenosaunee territory in Montreal. I'm a University Research Chair at Concordia University in Circumpolar Indigenous Arts, and I've been a curator for 17 years. But today I want to talk about a project that I am the director of, Indigenous Futures in Arts Leadership, which has a all-Inuit leadership council, which is probably the first time ever in our federal government's public funding system for research. I'm a professor, so I have access to other kinds of funding resources that don't necessarily exist in the arts in Canada. And so, like Kate was saying, I'm the first Inuk to have I'm an Inuk on my dad's side and white settler on my mom's side. And I'm the first Inuk in Canada to ever have a PhD in art history, so to be able to become a professor typically. There are other Inuit professors teaching in the arts, and there are other Inuit professors in other fields. But as the first, which is like, again, for me, I'm like, it's not a great thing. I think that
deserves a clap.
Well, I'm like, yes and no. I got my PhD in 2013, and here we are in 2023. And there's a couple of students who are coming up who I'm very excited about. But it leads to that condition that we were kind of talking about, which is that I got to remember to chance the rapper my microphone. It leads to that condition that we were talking about, which is that that everything about Inuit art up until Inuit started coming into this field maybe 20 years ago has been entirely written by non-Inuit. And so the thing about Inuit art is that we've been circulated globally. There's thousands of works and collections, millions of works and collections all over the world, both from historical periods right up to the contemporary day. In the mid-20th century, our work was used to establish Canada as an international northern power, so it was used as diplomatic gifts, and it ended up in lots of museums, our sort of modern art form, and there's a long, long art history around that. But all this is to say that there have been, hundreds of exhibition catalogs and exhibitions that have been mounted in Canada and the US and globally, thousands of writings and all these publications and texts and archives, and all of this work has been generated by non-Inuit largely. And so every museum in my country, and probably every museum in this country, has at least something that's Inuit. I haven't been anywhere in the world that doesn't have some kind of an Inuit art collection. But there are, to this day, just a handful of Inuit curators and very few Inuit who have agential control over what happens with our artworks or even how people are talking about it. And so when I became a professor, I realized that I could contribute to changing that by working with Inuit who were not necessarily in academia, but in various aspects of the arts, in order to try and bring up and bring along a lot more Inuit to become change makers in the field. And so working with my colleagues across all aspects of the visual and performing arts, Tekrilik Partridge, who's a writer, editor, performance artist, spoken word artist, but now is also the first Inuk curator at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is one of our country's biggest galleries. Jessica Kotick, who's the director of the Nunata Museum in Iqaluit. Alethea Arnaquak Barrel, you might have seen some of her documentary films. She just had a premiere at Sundance a couple of weeks ago. Jesse Tungalik, who's an arts administrator. Ronalda Arluk, I think the first Inuk playwright, and myself as an art historian. And what we did is we created a training and mentoring project that seeks to position Inuit either in institutions or outside of them on their independent projects, and to upend the way that mentorships and internships normally work. So to date, we've worked with about 50, mostly young, but not all young, to talk about young people, Inuit who are interested in all kinds of different aspects of the arts. There are no universities in the Arctic and very few colleges. And so if you want to train in the arts in a formal way, of course, there's lots of community training in the arts, but if you're interested in getting a degree in the arts, you have to travel to the south. And in the Canadian Arctic, most communities are fly-in only, meaning that it costs a lot of money. You can't just go home easily. It's like $2,000-3,000 to go from Ottawa or Toronto to Iqaluit. That's a 2-hour flight. it could be $2,500. And so if you want to travel to the south, then you're kind of stuck there. And because we're a small population, you're very often the only person in your art school who's from the north. And so it can be quite isolating. I had that experience myself. And so one of the things that we try to do is build a network amongst all of the students and let them see that they're not the only digital media artist or game designer or painter in the country, but that they actually have this amazing cohort of other young folks that they can work with. And we provide them with mentorship opportunities in institutions, lots of museums and galleries and film and other kind of production sets, but also we take them to conferences, they curate exhibitions, they perform and train with other Indigenous peoples in the performing arts. This is Jocelyn Perena and Aka Okanakak, the Inuit Futures student, working together on an exhibition that was at the WAG. But we also do things like get them all together. We brought them to Venice in our first year when Isuma, the film production house, was representing Canada for the first time at the Venice Biennale. And so we brought this group of amazing Inuit with us, and we had workshops. We met with the 3 Sami presidents who gave us like an hour of their time to talk about green colonialism and other issues that were affecting Sami that we had in common. And then all of the students wrote reflections or took photographs or did drawings and sketches, and they together created the first ever issue of Inuit Art Quarterly that was entirely Inuit produced, including 2 of our students were the first Inuk editors to ever work at that magazine. Inuit Art Quarterly is our country's only Indigenous arts magazine, and it has been around for 30 years, and this was the first time it had an Inuit editor or all Inuit contributions. We also take them on workshops and retreats. We do open calls so that it's not just students that we know, but that we're also trying to actively reach out into the community and find students and put them places. And I think one of the most critical decolonial strategies that we have is that we recognize that there's not that many Inuit students who are here to have these positions. And in Canada, we're 5 years past our we're 8 years past our Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to action that were put out to the country. So we had a reckoning with our history of residential schools, which is one of the worst legacies, but not the only legacy of colonization in our country. And in the aftermath of that, we also discovered that there were mass graves of little children on all of these residential school sites, which actually I think had a much bigger impact than the TRC reports themselves. And so in light of that, a lot of institutions have suddenly woken up to the fact that they're not doing enough and that they have responsibilities and that they hold our culture in trust, and they need to start letting us, they need to step aside and let us take up spaces that we should have so that there can become much more balance in the representation and who is being written about and who's doing the writing. And so when we started this project, and we had 17 partners join on, some from across the north, small, artist-run centers, like community theater groups and so on, like Indigenous run. But then we also have major partners all throughout southern Canada as well. To me, the south is everything below the north, so like Winnipeg, Toronto, that's all south to me. And so, so our southern partners would say, okay, so we have a position for a curatorial institute, and so send over some resumes and we'll pick a student for the show. And I was like, it doesn't work like that. We've got 15 young people across the country. You have 30 opportunities. Like they are precious, and they get to decide what they want to do, not you. Like you are a dime a dozen to us. Like there's an Inuit collection everywhere in the country. We can take our funding and we can support students anywhere we want, and all over the world. And so instead, we kind of turn the tables on institutions, and we say, you apply to us, and we will work with the students to find out what opportunity best suits them. And they will have the option to leave at a moment's notice if it's not going well. We are going to work with you. We're going to come alongside with you and make sure that they're having a good experience. I don't know if I have another slide or not. Oh, no, I don't. But, they hold the cards in this situation. They need to have a meaningful experience. They need to learn something that's going to prepare them for the future. And they are the interviewers. You are the interviewee. So I'll leave it there for now, but thank you.
I love how you talk about bringing in and mentoring young people and people of all ages really into this work, because it's absolutely it can be really lonely in these positions. It can be really difficult oftentimes to walk into rooms where you're the only one.
Well, it can make you, it makes gaslighting a lot easier. People can
Yeah.
make you feel like you're the crazy one and that your ideas aren't, and it's like there's a lot of pull in institutions. Even when individuals support something, institutional structures want you to maintain a status quo.
Yeah.
And so you need multiples, and you need a network, and you need people that you can talk to as mentors and say, am I crazy, or is this inappropriate, or all those kinds of things.
You need your people. I know I sometimes I feel like it just gets layered on until it's built up, and all of a sudden you realize, how did I let it get to this point? And you talk to somebody and they're like, how have you been carrying this? Right?
I joke around sometimes and I say, to institutions that want to make those native hires, like you have to think about like when you're adopting cats, you can't just adopt one, you have to get like two or more.
Or horses.
Right? I mean, but it's so true because these systems don't have support for us. They want us to fill their quotas. They want to say, oh, yeah, we have Native people here, but then they don't know how to support us. They don't know that, we have different worldviews. We have different ways of doing things even, and they just don't fit into their systems, right? So then it's not as much as, like, I'm in an institution where I'm trying to make other people feel comfortable when they come. I don't feel comfortable there. I'm not looked after. I'm not taken care of. And they don't take care of us, right? So I love what you said, too. Like, people got to learn how to step aside. Yeah. It's like, step aside. We got this. We know what we're doing. And I love what you're doing.
I love what you're doing.
I love what all of you are doing.
I really appreciate what you're saying there. And as I was saying it, I lost what I was going to say. What I was going to say is you said, like you need to appreciate that Indigenous peoples have a different worldview. But, in Southern Canada, it's largely First Nations and Métis people who are around cities, people who work in institutions are more accustomed to working around. And Inuit are very different than, have a very different way of being in the world. And except for myself, can be quite shy. Shyness is kind of cultural. And so, like, if you are at an institution and you're used to working with Haudenosaunee people who are typically, I'm going to characterize your people as not that shy. I feel like that's fair. Then you might be expecting an Inuk to speak up and to not suppress themselves. But in Inuit culture, for example, you don't speak up unless you feel like you can speak confidently with authority, and so you're always humbling yourself. And then the other person in the room, if they start speaking with authority, the more that they seem to take up space that they maybe don't have, the more that you sort of take down space. And so Inuit need to be called upon and asked and said, like, we would like to hear your perspective. And it's that kind of thing can be, even when people are trying not to cause any harm, just not understanding the cultural difference can be really affecting.
Absolutely. And I've noticed within institutions, oftentimes it's important to have the push, that external push of people outside the institution, along with those of us who are, as Deani Whitehawk, my friend once put it, within the belly of the beast, to be doing the pulling. And so we need both of that. We need to be within all of these spaces. And oftentimes when we're inside these organizations, what we realize is we're doing all of the work that people in other departments get to sometimes get other people to do. You can't just trust social media or marketing to do it. You have to have eyes on everything that goes out. Or it will be offensive, or it will be, the language won't be right. And, that's one of the things that I've learned along the way is that, people think, oh, we only do Native things. Native things are everything, right? And that's a lot. That's a lot. One question I have is, and you talked about this a bit, but in terms of bringing other people in, what are some things that institutions can do besides, hiring one position in community engagement? What are some other positions or other things that institutions can do to help create safe spaces for us within their institutions?
I think, first of all, we need more Native people in leadership, because then it has to trickle down too, right? Because then when you have somebody who's not Native in leadership who says, yes, I'm doing decolonization work, and I know what that means. They really don't. And then they pass it along to people below them to carry out the work. But then if they're not Native and they don't get it, they don't know how to do it. So then that burden always falls on like the one Native person that is working there. So, I mean, I think it's complicated. There's a lot that goes into it, and especially, and I'm speaking from my experience of working at the Field Museum. This is what I'm experiencing, right? This is what I'm seeing. You're always going to have colleagues and people that do get it, that understand, that are supportive, but they leave too, right? They're not there all the time. And then new people come in. And I feel like as a Native person, I'm constantly, and I think for all of us, right? Like we're constantly every single day, even here at Expo, like, and in the artwork that we do and all the work we do, we're always burdened with educating everybody that we talk to, everyone new. And that's why I think it's just a hard thing to be a Native person, even if they do make a safer space, or even if they do, like, how long will that take? And, I think it takes Native people in those spaces to help create and teach how that space has to be safe, right? But then that's so much work, because we're doing that on top of all the work that we're doing, that we were hired for. So, and then I think, I'm at the point of exhaustion, right? So that's why it's like, you know what? My energy, I want to focus it on my own center where I could do my work my way with my closest friends who are also artists, who care about the same things, and we work well together, right? We're Native people creating space and making sure that it's that we're doing the best that we can for other Native people. And sometimes I think that's just how it has to be. I don't have another answer for that.
Yeah, before my current position, I did work at an American art museum, and I'll say I only lasted a year, because part of the problem is that this museum has a large collection of George Catlin's, Joseph Henry Sharp paintings, and so they wanted me to reinterpret them. And I had to tell them, I am not trained in depictions of Native people by white male artists. Like, I have no interest in that, and there are people that want to do that work, and so that's great, they can do that work. But for me, I have no interest in George Catlin, Edward Curtis, no interest. And so there was this one curator who wrote a label for a Joseph Henry Sharp painting, and the lead curator said to me, I have to have you look at this because we just can't put this out. And so I looked at the label and it was horrible. And I was looking at the painting and it was supposed to depict some Blackfeet ceremony. And I'm not Blackfeet. And that's another thing that people have to know. Like, I don't know everything about every single Indigenous community in the Western Hemisphere. And yet I am asked to now correct her label. And so what I did is I reached out to the Blackfeet Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and I first apologized. I was like, I'm so sorry that I am taking you away from your work. I want to show you this painting and this label. Do you even want to help me try to figure out what's going on there? Is this real? Is this not real? Like, what's happening here? And he was so wonderful, John Murray, and he replied to me and he said, yeah, let's get on the phone. And so he got on the phone with me and he showed me every single instance that this painting was wrong. And he said, this is a fictitious ceremony that does not exist. It was in the mind of this artist. And then also, when I did more research to understand that these white artists had patrons that wanted their work. So oftentimes they were creating these fictional things just because they knew that they could sell a painting of a ceremony. And so I got all this wonderful, help from him. I presented it at a curatorial staff meeting so everybody could learn what I had, been given by this amazing person, and she refused to acknowledge. She said, well, how does he know? And it was so crazy to me because I was like, this is someone who is Blackfeet and has lived being Blackfeet. And you are going to tell me that this white artist who would summer in Montana, knows everything about the Blackfeet nation. And I will say it were those kind of experiences where I was like, I can't be here because it took so much of my time that is not my job to help her. And then she refused to acknowledge it. So at that point, I was like, well, even though, of course, every museum has a lot of problems. And so I'm not saying that the National Museum of the American Indian is wonderful, but I will say that at least in that space, I can always push back because our vision statement is social justice and equity for the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. So if that's in the vision statement of the museum where I work, then I can always say, well, hey, but in other museums, yeah, you are like the one.
Amazing. I would say for institutions, I fully believe in what Debra's doing. I'm like, we need to build our own institutions. But even when we do build our own institutions, they're still governed by state or provincial and federal laws. There's still a lot of things that legally have to be done. So we really do, for me now, it's exhibitions are not going to decolonize the world. I've come to that conclusion. And museums have so much work to be done, but it actually has to go so much higher because labor law and employment law and structures and institutions and employees from the top all the way down, everything needs to be changed in order for there to be systemic and lasting change.
And
if your exhibitions are amazing, but the docents are volunteers who don't have time who have not been compensated for their time to learn about the histories, then you're potentially setting people up to give tours that are full of misinformation. And it's because museums rely on volunteers, and the volunteers can't necessarily get degrees in information. So learning that about the experience of docents has really changed the way that I train docents when I curate an exhibition. If the security guards follow all the people of color around the gallery, then that's not a decolonized experience for anyone in the space. It's the way that an institution makes you feel is such a big part of how that impact is on you. And then and like you said, it has to come from the very top. If the directors and the board of directors are not 100% on board with the mission of what's trying to happen, your colleagues can undermine it. The finance department can be the tail wagging the dog, or comms, or any of these things. And so you really do need leadership that believes in it, and then it needs to come all the way down. And otherwise, it's a little bit like you're wasting your time, or you're on the hamster wheel, like you were saying. You get exhausted trying to fight these systems when people are constantly against it. And so, but I'm with museums, I'm it's like my bad boyfriend. I keep going back. I'm we should build our own things. But I'm oh, but I just really love their collections. Can I be allowed into the collection, please? And so you have to, if you want to keep doing these things, I think we need to get at the broader structures that impact the way that we're allowed to work. The fact that a gallery must have a board that has a treasurer, a president, a vice president, that there has to be a hierarchy in the board, and that, what I mean? And just these kind of things, if you want to do non-hierarchical consensus work, there is ultimately, that also takes a lot of labor to undo because of, all kinds of regulations that were built for a reason, and are there to protect people. But so doing that kind of unpacking, I think, is the next big wave.
Absolutely. I think that museums, in a way, they can be, it can be an abusive relationship. It definitely can. And oftentimes we are worried about being tokenized. We're worried about not being listened to. We're worried about our own relationships with our own community members and relatives and family members and friends being used in certain ways where then we have to protect them. And sometimes we're the middle person, we're the translator, we're the connector, we're the filter.
Yeah.
And we end up holding all of the messiness so that it doesn't go out into our community. And we hold that. And it's a lot. And so I think everyone here is really invested in figuring out how do we create a system, how do we create a process where we're not always so exhausted. My good friend Twyla Baker coined a term with some educators called translation exhaustion, which I use a lot and I think about a lot because I feel it regularly, right? And so thinking about, there are some very sort of tangible things that sometimes we can do within some of these spaces, whether it's our own space or a space, a colonial space of someone else's that we're integrating, occupying. I think that there are different things we can do. And one of the things I was remembering just now when we were coming in to this space was, Debra, I remember when you brought my family to the Field Museum. And I have 3 little girls, and my husband's from Pine Ridge. And I remember when we came to the field, and my husband was like, saw all the plantings, the indigenous plantings around the museum. And he's like, oh, you have elk medicine. You have elk medicine outside the field. And she said, you should go pick it. And we went out, and I used to live in Chicago years ago, and I had always felt very sort of not welcome within that space. Not saying that it is necessarily that much more welcoming, but that experience, having Debra there with me and my children while we picked elk medicine, I will never forget that moment. It was so important. And that was something that helped my children to know that they were welcome within that space. So Pinamaya, for all of your hard work. But also, what are some other things that we can do to help welcome our friends and relatives into some of these gallery spaces?
Thank you. Because I was hoping that all of this would lead into, because I know we're here at Expo, there's a lot of, white-owned galleries, white-led galleries, many, and I see, I'm seeing so much representation of, Black artists all over, and I think that's so beautiful. And I hope that it's art made by Black artists too. But they're in galleries that are, managed and led by white people. I see some galleries, a few here, that have some Native art. And again, wonderful. I'm so glad that you're representing some Native artists. But again, who are they? They're like the top tier of those Native artists, right? Why aren't there more Native artists? But then, are those spaces welcoming to Native people and Native community that want to engage with and interact with that art? I love Native art. I love to see Native art, but I don't always feel welcome into those white gallery spaces. So you have my people in there, but you're not welcoming to me. I walk in through the door and you just kind of look at me because I'm not dressed a certain way. You don't say hello to me, but you say hello to the white person who walks in behind me, and they go up to that same art. And instead I come in, I'm like, I actually know that person. I went to school with that person. And then your tone changes, right? But I mean, that's not a welcoming space. That's not how we want to be able to go and see our people in these spaces, in these galleries, but you need to create a welcoming space for us. You also need to do that outreach. Like what kinds of outreach is being done, with Native communities around you, in your proximity, in your town. Chicago has one of the largest urban Native population, but how many of these galleries that bring in Native artists are coming to us and saying, hey, we want to do something with you. We want to bring you in when we host these artists at our gallery. I've never had anybody come to me and say, hey, come to this opening, or let's do something exclusively for Native community. We could do for a lot of, that kind of engagement, or just that simply just, reaching out to those artists or those communities that are within your reach. We're here.
Pidamaya. So there's a call to action. Contact Debra.
Contact Center for Native Futures. But don't bombard us though, because we have work to do.
I would say I really want people to treat my institution the same level as yours, because I always tell stories, so that's how I kind of, give examples. This art museum came to me and said, oh, we recently acquired these 2 works by James Luna, And, we want to display, one of the works in our museum and maybe at your museum at the same time. And I was thinking, why would we display your acquisition? And it took me a while, because at first I was like, don't say what you want to say. My mom always says, think about it, go to sleep, and then write the response. And so I had to tell her, I said, the National Museum of the American Indian did James Luna's artifact piece revisited in the New York Museum with James's permission. Then we also did take a picture with an Indian in Union Station in DC when James was alive and James was there. And then we also sponsored him to help him go to Italy for Immediato when he did that for the Venice Biennale. We acquired that work from Venice, and it's in our collection. So I said, we had a relationship with James Luna when he was alive. So why would we help you? I had to say it, why? What is this? And so I could feel that because this was a very wealthy art museum in Washington, D.C., that they felt like, oh, well, we're amazing, right? You would want to display our acquisition. And it's like, no, we actually had a real relationship with James Luna. And you're getting on the bandwagon after he passed away. And, and she was kind of shocked, but she did say thank you, I think, because I was trying to explain to her, we're the same as you. Don't try to make it seem like, oh, the poor National Museum of the American Indian needs your help. And it's like, no, you need us. We're the ones who have the relationships, with a lot of artists. And you're the ones who are now getting on to this contemporary Indigenous art bandwagon. So I think that's what my thing is, treat us with respect.
For me, and making space for Inuit to feel welcome inside exhibitions. So I've done a lot of small northern community-based, what you might call an exhibition. We don't really have formal exhibition spaces in the north, and so and it'd be very hard to tour a show from an institution from the south to the north, because most of those places don't have the kind of quality controls required by a museum collection. So obviously there are some institutions, but not on a big scale. So then when I'm doing a show in a southern Canadian city or somewhere else in the world, I know that the majority of the audience is not going to be Inuit. There's just not that many Inuit. There were 75,000 people in a country of 40 million or whatever. And so what I try to do is embed Easter eggs so that Inuit know that the show is for them first. I think of Inuit as the audience, and then everyone else can figure it out. You know what I mean? You're welcome to come in the space, but there are some things that you're not gonna catch, but Inuit will catch it. Yes. And that for me is how I make sure that Inuit know that the show is for them, because I was talking about that history and how Inuit art has always been curated by non-Inuit for non-Inuit audiences. And so just using the label text and writing we instead of writing they, things like that, using the proper Inuit place names and not the names named after colonial explorers, not translating that, just using the Inuit name. And I'm you can take out your phone and Google it if you want to, look up what place, if you're you really need to know what fort it was or whatever previously. And also embedding things that are part of Inuit culture into the works, and selecting works that will really resonate with Inuit, and just knowing that everyone else has 70 years of seeing the other side of Inuit art, and they're going to bring that knowledge to the exhibition as well. Yeah.
I love that. I love that idea of not necessarily translating, just being and creating something that we know is for us. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately as well, and I think that's incredibly important so that you can create an authentic space and something that is special, right? I know we're running a little bit short on time here, but we've got a few minutes left. I wanna ask you all, in terms of thinking towards the future, and what sort of inspires you, what drives you. What do you envision for your Native future?
Wow, that's a big question. I think because we've been viewed as always being part of the past, right? And people, they know us historically. They don't know us presently. They don't know us, and that yes, we see ourselves in the future, and we're not just imagining ourselves and our futures. We are realizing our futures. We are making our futures happen for us and our young people. And that's why our name, Center for Native Futures, because we want you to know that we will be here long after you're all gone. Land back,
First and last.
First and last, exactly. And I just, I think for now, we're just taking it one day at a time, one step at a time. We're supposed to be doing our strategic planning and looking 3 years ahead. That's difficult when there's so much work that needs to be done presently. But there's definitely, I hope that Center for Native Futures will be here for a long time. We're going to be moving into the Marquette building for at least the next 3 years, but hopefully we will have a permanent home somewhere here in Chicago. But I think that's where my focus right now is the near future for our future.
I will say, so when I think about working in a federal institution, right? So I'm a federal employee, I work for a federal institution. So it is tough, it is tough to work for a federal museum. But I think for me, one of the reasons why, and I love the metaphor of the bad boyfriend, because it's like there are certain days when you just kind of, the craziness of a museum, right? Like, just kind of gets you. And you do kind of question like everything, like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, I could be just sitting at home beating some more earrings and, watching shows and stuff like that. Like, why am I doing this to myself, But I will say, at least when I think about my role at the National Museum of the American Indian, is I'm really trying to provide access, right? Like it's like artists can come to me, and like recently, like Carla Hemlock, who's a Mohawk artist, was going to like come to DC with her husband and her children, and wanted to come to view the Mohawk items that are in the collection. And so we're short-staffed right now. So that meant that I spent my entire day with them to help them out and to be there with them. Of course I had other things to do, but it was really important where I was like, they're coming all the way to Washington, D.C. to spend time with the items from their community. And so I want to be the face that they can come to, at least to like help them out or navigate something if they have a question, something like that. So that's how I kind of like look at what I'm doing right now, is that it's just really, and I'm still amazed that museums don't do this. Like, I can't believe, and you hear stories all the time about Native people contacting museums that have their material culture, their history, their everything, their culture in the collection, and they don't provide access. Yeah. And that drives me crazy. Absolutely. Like, why do you think it's yours? It's not. And I'm very aware that where I work at a museum, none of the collection is ours. It is not. Like, the knowledge is within the communities themselves. So I'm there to help to facilitate some sort of access and to hope that it's a pleasant experience as much as possible. So for me, in that federal institution, that's at least what I'm trying to do.
Helping us connect to our relatives, and our relatives in collections connecting to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really with Anya on that point. We have to, if we're going to revolutionize institutions, we need to understand them not as the colonial trophy case keeping houses that they were formed to be, from cabinets of curiosities. Everybody here's in the art world, right? So like cabinet of curiosities right up to the present, it was always to show off spoils of war and extraction and exploitation. And so if we're going to change institutions, we need to change the way that we think about collections, as even them being called collections, and understand them as the peoples who they have been taken from under lots of circumstances. Reframing how we even think about the things that are in museums and if they should be in them, and how we think about institutions themselves as actually serving a social good, and what role, how the way you think about those collections changes when you think about service to community instead of things that you own as an institution. So that's a big one. And then, like, globally speaking, and I don't know to what degree I will personally contribute to this, but I think that we're in a state of all kinds of states of crises right now. And what I really admire about Indigenous thought is that it is always across Indigenous peoples very conscientious of the deep history of where we come from, going back for millennia. We're always thinking about our ancestors and our responsibilities to them, but then also the generations forward. And that's something that I think that Western society is doing a terrible job of right now. We're not thinking about what's going to happen in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. We're having children and grandchildren, and like, what world are we leaving for them? Or what about their grandchildren and then their grandchildren? And so I think that if we could take anything forward, it would be really starting to take a much longer view about what we do today and how it impacts those that come after us. Thank you.
Indigenous strategic planning, right? I love it. And we're going to do it, and I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited for all of what all of the women on this platform and the audience are doing, so that my own children, so that my daughters can be in a different place when they come into some of these spaces, and so that our nieces and nephews and those who come after us have a different experience than we had. I think that that's really important. I know we've run out of time, but I just want to say Pidamaya, Wopida Tanka. I appreciate all of you.